All right, this is very improvised, so I apologize in advance. But thank you for your time. Um, I did a quick split rate analysis in Puerto Rico, and I set up a presentation to show lawmakers, and up to now I've shown it to a few people, and this is a very distilled version in English of that presentation of the work that I've done. Yeah, so a quick overview. There's 78 municipalities in Puerto Rico. There's no cities or unincorporated territory. So all the territory belongs to one municipality or another, right? And municipalities are not like counties, as in they have mayors. They have mayors and their legislative assembly, but there's no third level. There's no three levels like there is in typical in the United States. There's a single property tax agency called CREAM that was created in 1991 by law. CREAM does all assessment and all collection and has a board composed of 10 mayors of 10 different municipalities and one person from the central government. In addition to that, Puerto Rico has 30-year adverse possession laws. So nobody dares try to squat in a building for, 30 years. That's almost a lifetime. There's an inheritance limbo where if inheritors can refuse to claim an inheritance, they can sort of refuse. They can keep procrastinating on claiming the inheritance. And so nothing happens with these buildings that are inherited for a long time. Assessments are based in 1957 base year values, and that's created because that has happened because there's a $15,000 hard-coded homestead exemption. And because it's hard-coded into the law, if the base year was rolled and assessment values were increased, then that would basically nullify the benefit of the homestead exemption. So it has created a third rail, a political third rail. Assessments are frozen, and anything to do with politics of property tax is completely frozen for a long time. And there's no liens and no tax foreclosures. So in my neighborhood, there's a single entity that owns four buildings in very valuable land that he hasn't paid any property tax on any of those four abandoned buildings since 2012, and nothing has happened. There's quite a bit of sprawl and depopulation of the traditional urban centers. As you can see, population that's a handful of urban centers. It kind of peaked around 1950 and then started declining. Everybody started moving out to the suburbs, to the rural districts of the municipalities. In the left you have the population in the traditional urban centers, and on the right it's the growth of the suburban population in what were formerly rural districts within the municipalities. So as you can see in the blue line on the right, there's some old suburbs, like streetcar suburbs, that since the 50s have been abandoned. And that's actually where I live. I live in a streetcar suburb that's lost a lot of population.
Because the streetcar's stopped?
Yeah, there's no streetcar anymore, obviously. Puerto Rico has a bit of a housing problem that nobody seems to want to talk about in public discourse. At least I don't hear a lot about it. And I threw some stats with some census data, and here you have, this was 2014 data. So here you have Pittsburgh median house price. Median house price is just over 2 times median income. And for Puerto Rico, you have that same stat goes over 6 times. And then in San Juan, it goes over 8 times. And then you have the classic paradox of a lot of empty buildings, which apparently in San Juan it's up to 40% vacancy, and extremely expensive housing. Typical Georgist problem. So you guys, this is a map of land values. I wanted to show it first with um, quick quick recap. Around 4 years ago, the the single tax assessment agency, they released their database in a form which any technologically savvy person could just scrape it off their website and create a full copy of the database. So that I did that and started running some numbers. So the first map I show here is the concentration of land values around the San Juan metro area, and I did it first showing the labels of the different municipalities just so that you can get an idea of what the municipalities look like. The land value is concentrated obviously in the San Juan metro area, which is in the northeast of the island. You can see the San Juan Bay there. And there's a little bit in the second city of Ponce in the south. And that's what it looks like without the label, so you have a better idea of how land value is concentrated. And this is a bit of a close-up. And in the bottom legends, you can see that this is up to $400 per square meter. So it's from $0 to $400 per square meter.
That's San Juan. What about the
That's another city in the center, just south of San Juan. That's called Caguas.
What month's like before? What about the one?
In the bottom, that's the city of Ponce. Let me show you with the labels. Yeah. Yeah. Everybody got that? And now that's a big close-up. Obviously, within the San Juan metro area, land value is concentrated in. This is Old San Juan. That on the extreme tip of that little island, that's Old San Juan, and then the streetcar suburb is this peninsula that's just below Old San Juan, and the beachfront touristic part of that peninsula of Santurce. I live in the center of Santurce. In the north part of Santurce is all beachfront, really touristic, expensive land. And the stats, the aggregate stats of the assessment is that land is about 27% of value of the entire assessment roll for the entire island. So buildings are 73%.
Is this still 1954 size?
It's not 1957 stats, it's 1957 base year values. So whenever somebody builds something new, then they assess the value. They do some sort of magic projection, which there is no documentation on how they do it. So they do some magic incantation where they project those values back into 1957 base year values. Yeah. So maybe somebody here can illustrate how that works. Because this is not the only place that has old base year assessments. I heard that some places in Pennsylvania have 1960s base year values, there's some sort of magical incantation way to get newly built properties and basically calculate the value that it would have had in that base year. So homestead houses that have a homestead exemption because it's a primary household, 15% of the tax roll for those types of properties is land, and 85% is buildings. That obviously creates an opportunity because so much of the value is in buildings. So applying a lower tax rate on buildings and a higher tax rate on land means that most people pay less, and that's what I'm about to show. Oh, all right, this one's in Spanish, but I figured out, I thought of a way of how to distribute the homestead exemption if you have a split rate, right? So if you have a 20,000, these are 1957 values, so the numbers are a little low. So, but this is a typical. Maybe you have a house that's assessed at $20,000. $16,000 of that value is allocated to the building, while $4,000 belong to the land in the assessment roll. So what I do is I take the excess of the homestead exemption, which would be 20 minus 15, that would be $5,000, and the proportion of building to land, I apply the rates accordingly to the proportion of buildings to land with the $5,000 excess. I don't know if you guys got that. Yeah. So this is what the tax rates are in a handful of municipalities. Since the assessment values are so low, the nominal tax rates right now for San Juan is 9.3%. It's very high nominal values. They have to compensate for the low assessment values. And if we were to do a 2-to-1 split rate using current assessment rolls, what we would get is a rate of 7.96 on the building and then 15.92% on the land. And that's for other municipalities. I took a handful of municipalities just to show. 9.3 is the current mill rate, or the current tax rate, nominal tax rate on the assessment values. And if we were to turn this into a 2-to-1 split, like Pittsburgh had for much of the 20th century, before the end of the 1970s, that would turn into a 7.96% for buildings and then 15.92% on land.
How come 9.3 becomes 2-to-1 split? 9.3.
Because it depends on how much of the assessed value is on land and how much is assessed on buildings. That's why. So it depends on those numbers. Yeah. What's the final effect on tax liability is for all properties, 25% end up paying less, 25% end up paying more with a 2-to-1 split, and 50% of properties, which is most houses that do not pay anything at all. Right now, they stay not paying anything at all because we need to keep the homestead exemption, or else nothing's going to get anywhere. So in terms of primary households, we have 15% pay less, 6% pay more, and then 77% pay the same. And this is a spatial distribution of who pays more and who pays less. The green means that they pay less, and the red means that they pay more. The reason that there's a lot more red than there is green is because the green places are actually high-rise condos. So they have a lot of housing units there that end up paying less. So that's the center, that line in the center, that quarter in the center of the map, that's basically where the old streetcar route. So land values, I don't know if it's a defect of the assessment process, it could be, but still the higher values follow the old streetcar line.
How long has the streetcar been gone?
Since like 1950.
Since the last assessment.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that could explain it. The assessment was based on the streetcar line.
Yeah. And this is a bigger overview. And this for Josh. This is Rio Piedras. This is where the university is at. And this is the part that I showed you that there's a group of people trying to lift that up because it's very blighted, very abandoned. And this is what it looks like, who pays more, who pays less, as a percentage of what they pay now. The former maps were based on basically on density, and this is calculated upon a percentage of what they pay now. So it's
Why would somebody pay 21%? There's one black dot. Black is 21%?
the very dark red means that they pay from 71% to 94% more than they pay now. So the darker green means that they pay 20%, 20 to 50% less than they pay now.
Victor, we were talking yesterday about the tax delinquencies, and the government doesn't go after people.
Yeah.
Would the government be legally able to sell those tax liens to a private company to try to collect them in order to raise revenue?
Yes, they are perfectly able to do it legally. In fact, there was a movement to go ahead and do that for the past couple of years, but it's just stalled. So they had a sale of tax liens in 1997, but it was a complete failure that ended up in lawsuits concerning contractual obligations. And after that, the sting seems to have not worn off, the sting of that failure. And just now they were kind of looking into it, but we'll get around to it sometime, maybe by next decade. And this is a map of land values per capita, which is kind of interesting because you have towns with very little population, like Culebra that's an island municipality on the extreme right of the map. I didn't notice how bad absentee landlordism goes on in that little island until I looked at the map. Almost all land, that's just like prime beachfront, rural beachfront properties, and the government of Puerto Rico has done a big job of promoting that island as a tourist destination because it's got the best beaches. It's really a breathtaking place, and the absentee landlordism is obviously enormous.
Victor,
Yeah.
same question out of the context. For the unemployment in general in Puerto Rico, what is?
Oh, well, the unemployment is traditionally we never had single digit unemployment. In the States, it's when people say double digit unemployment, everybody opens their eyes like that. But traditionally, in Puerto Rico's never had single digit unemployment. It's always been double digit. Double digits, it's typical to see a 15% unemployment, very typical. And the labor participation rate in the U.S. average is around the 60%, and in Puerto Rico is around 40%. So that's my final slide, and that's a quick rundown of the work that I've done. Thank you. Does anybody have any more questions?
Thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. Just reverting in a sense to a point that was being made earlier, do you have any feel for the tax burden of the population of Puerto Rico over and above property taxes? I.e., what proportion of public revenue is actually drawn from property and what proportion is drawn indiscriminately, if I could put it that way, from income and sales taxes?
The bigger proportion is income taxes for the central government. In terms of municipalities, I saw a graph of the San Juan budget, and their revenues come 27% from property tax, and most of the rest is either federal government and sales taxes. Sales taxes and perhaps some like construction. They have like a tax on construction, which is actually...
So in terms of impact on the population, the property taxes is relatively small compared with the impact of the other taxes.
Yeah, the property tax is very low. That 27% that I mentioned for the San Juan municipality, what happens is that includes the personal property tax, which is like a tax on inventory. So they don't have a data on what percentage of the property tax is split between that personal property tax and the regular immovable property tax. So it's probably even lower. So it would be anywhere around 10-15%. But that's the municipality. The central government has basically no property tax whatsoever. So the central government is getting money from the highest sales tax of any U.S. jurisdiction, which is 11.5%. And in addition to that, we have an income tax that since we don't pay federal income tax, the income tax of Puerto Rico for the general population is pretty high. Is very high. The tax brackets go up to 33%, but you start paying as soon as you earn $1 over the minimum wage.
So minimum wage plus a fraction, you're paying tax, as well as the tax on the things you're purchasing.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, just a short question. Why bother taxing buildings at all? Why bother taxing buildings at all?
Why bother? Why bother taxing? Because for transition purposes, basically, it's just allowing an avenue. What my split rate proposal is just like any split rate proposal. It's to allow a transition phase, to not shock anybody. Because if you have a small house with some pensioners living right between two high-rise condominiums, if you shift to a land tax cold turkey, these pensioners suddenly will get an enormous tax bill.
But still, you add values like 94% increase. That will be a shock.
That map that I showed you, where tax burden increases as a percentage of current tax burden, that happens in. You have very high percentage of increase over what they pay now with this split rate. The thing is that that's usually in rural properties that don't have a lot of value.
Yeah, so they pay not a lot of tax.
Yeah, so the impact would be that as big as it looks like a big red when you look at the map.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, Victor. That was great. I'm curious with the split rate proposal. I recognize that you want to start with incremental change and work your way up. When you or others make these proposals, do you come up with timelines for shifting the split rate to closer to just land value taxation in general? Or have you ever heard of any programs where you go straight to LVT but implement like other easement mechanisms like subsidizing seniors or people who took out a mortgage in the last 10 years or something like that?
I think the homestead exemption covers, for example, pensioners. It helps out with the pensioners, so I didn't have to elaborate much on that part. But no, there is no time scale in this analysis.
I want to thank you for your talk. I wanted to ask you, why are companies moving there and then the taxes that they need to pay, they don't pay, but yet the country gets charged for the taxes? How is that being allowed?
Okay, I think what he's talking about, you might be talking about several things. Are you talking about right now? Companies that are moving there right now?
Companies that are there already and that are moving there.
All right. The current situation has to do with a law called Act 20 and Act 22. Act 20 and Act 22, since we don't pay no federal income tax, and this includes corporations. So Act 20 and 22, what it does is it exempts income locally in Puerto Rico for those companies if they relocate to Puerto Rico. And that kind of applies to individuals. So there's some people moving there. This tax exemption was already there for pharmaceuticals, but no new pharmaceuticals are interested. So what they did was they extended those income tax exemptions for these finance firms like investment funds and software firms, so they could get the same treatment that pharmaceuticals were getting before. The problem is that I don't know, maybe 4 or 6 years have passed since these laws were enacted. Very little in jobs have been generated because, for example, software firms, I mean, they hire two or three guys, maybe. They bring their software developers from elsewhere. Software developers can work remotely in the States, and investment firms, they don't really have a lot of employees, so not much jobs.
You've described an economic baseline that sounds pretty bad. I'm just wondering, how would you characterize the effect of post-Hurricane Maria on land values and unemployment rates and such things?
Land values are dropping fast in regular old middle-class neighborhoods. But let me show you real quick. Because of that Act 20 and 22, Act 22 applies to individuals. So rich individuals can move to Puerto Rico and pay 4% tax in Puerto Rico. So that's why, for example, the crypto bros, the Bitcoin guys, that they in the internet they call them the crypto bros. They come down, they fly down to Puerto Rico to relocate there. And I mean, they do their thing, but it doesn't really generate any jobs. But the effect, whether it was originally planned that way or not, is that certain enclaves of neighborhoods, of like beachfront and touristic neighborhoods, their land values are going up while the rest of the values are going down.
Thank you very much. I've seen a bit of what you've done. I think it's terrific, and I can assure you that working on 1957 or 1954 values is a real headache. And my first thought is that if we push for a total reassessment of Puerto Rico and people are shocked out of their shoes, then we could bring in a land value tax. But my second question was sort of related to Lindy's. The Hurricane Maria, of course, hurt property values, but it must have decimated income tax and sales tax revenues, or did it not?
It is, and I don't have any raw data on that, but what I know is that it has accelerated the emigration from Puerto Rico to the United States. So if there's no people, there's no income, so no income tax.
Yeah,
so I figure
the property tax could replace that huge loss in income and sales. That's an idea.
Well, it could, but there's a problem. These 1957 values, the total, I think the total assessment roll is like $2 billion. Only $2 billion, the total assessment roll. So that imposes limits on how much could be, and the general budget, the general fund, the revenues for the general fund are about $10 billion.
Have you presented your excellent presentation here to officials in Puerto Rico or to parties there, and if so, what reaction have you gotten?
I presented it to one mayor out of a contact that I have with a professor from the University of Planning of Puerto Rico, and you know he seemed to grasp it, but there's no commitment. There's no further commitment. I just started with this. This was at the beginning of this year was when I assembled this analysis.
We have time for one more question.
Thanks very much for giving me another go. Just linking really with Josh's point there, but you don't need a hurricane to make the tax switch. Or it would seem to me, if you've already got a tax threshold on income, which is only just above the minimum income, well, double that for a start, and reduce taxes on sales, and then make the switch. So, and that way you benefit the maximum number of the population as well. You have the possibility of increasing the general level of earnings and stopping taxing people from working, which is clearly a clear issue. Is that a viable or prospective possibility in your opinion?
I was thinking that one way we could do that, for example, increasing the minimum threshold where you start paying would be to deduct rent, like housing rent on your household for from the income tax. I think that would be a great way to do it, in addition to shifting up the tax brackets. But I've thought about it, but that's just me.
I mean, within the just in that context, it's a very interesting exercise we've done in the UK here, which shows how the impact of VAT, which is in the UK 20%, i.e. a sales tax, more than outweighs the reduction in income tax that the poor people pay.
Mm-hmm.
So overall, the impact on poor and rich and high salaried and low salaried alike is pretty much the same, actually, which thus means that proportionately the poorer fit much harder by those other secondary non-property related taxes.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. In 2006 was the first time that the government stared down the debt cliff. They looked down upon it and they were scared. So what they did was that they massively increased the sales tax and sold bonds financed by the sales tax, which is obviously, sales tax destroys itself. Destroys its own base, so that's obviously not a good idea. Thank you all.